Welcome to another edition of Global Conversations with Regis Tremblay, coming to you from beautiful and historic Yalta in the Crimea of the Russian Federation. Yalta is a vibrant city that energizes and inspires all who live and come here. Young and old relish this historic and beautiful place located between majestic mountains and the Black Sea. Welcome to another edition of Global Conversations. My guest is somebody that is very, very important right now. He's an author, he's a writer, he's a blogger. He has his own video and radio broadcast called China Rising Radio Sinoland. He's not able to return to China because of COVID. So he is currently in Portugal, but will be residing permanently in France. My guest tonight, Jeff J. Brown. Jeff, welcome to the show.
So honored to be on the show, Regis. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I am really happy to have you because I think there are only two important topics to talk about today, and that is U.S.-Russia relations and U.S.-China relations. Yeah. Tonight, we're going to focus on China, but as everybody knows who's been watching my show, Joseph Biden last week referred to President Vladimir Putin as a soulless killer. And he said that Vladimir Putin would have to pay, meaning Russia would have to pay for this so-called meddling. A couple of days later, at this very important meeting of Chinese and U.S. representatives in Alaska with Tony Blinken, the U.S. representative harangued China and accused China of all kinds of violations. And so simultaneously, U.S. and China relations have really gone to pot. Now, Jeff, I want to start, first of all, not with the current relations. We'll pick up on that. You lived in China for 16 years. First of all, why did you go there? And second of all, what can you tell the West about China from the perspective of an American who's lived there for so many years?
Great question, Regis. I had lived and worked in Africa and the Middle East for 10 years, from 1980 to 1990. I got married to my wife in 1988, and we were ready for a change. 1990, I asked my company that I was working with, if the next position that opens up, let me know. We're interested. I'm kind of burned out here. And lo and behold, being the country director in China came up, and that was in 1990. We lived in China and worked, traveled all over the place because I was in agriculture, so I really got to see a lot of the country. And so from 1990 to 1997, we lived there, and it was just an amazing experience. It was the Wild West, what I call the Wild East, but Deng Xiaoping, wild buckaroo days, back when with Deng's, liberalization. And basically he turned it into basically a bit of a capitalist jungle. Although of course they did keep the a tight rein on the state economy. It was just amazing. And we had our two kids there. In 1997, we left for a lot of reasons. And then after time in the United States and France, we went back to China in 2010 and stayed there until 2019. So 9 plus 7 is 16 years. And of course, what was so really amazing about it is, I got to see China back in the crazy, post Tiananmen, because we arrived just right after Tiananmen Square, the protests. We were there, and it was like a drug trip. It was just something that you had to experience to even believe that it could happen. And so we, went back, to France, and then the United States. And I think we went bankrupt in 2008. And I think that probably had something to do with it, because we really got to see the ugly aspects of the United States' jungle, dog eat dog capitalism. And when we got back to China in 2010, I was absolutely blown away at what I was seeing. It was just like this, I saw more poverty in Oklahoma than I did in China. And so I got the idea. I said, I've got to get out. I'm sorry, I've got a sore throat lozenge and water I'm trying. And I thought, I've got to get out and see what's going on. And so I intentionally traveled to the 5 poorest provinces of China. And that's what's got me going with my career in writing. And that's when I wrote my first book, 44 Days Backpacking in China. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what was going on in China, and how the people had grown, and how they had gotten out of all of that, wild west, buckaroo cowboy mentality, dog eat dog, which I blamed incorrectly on the Cultural Revolution. I now realize that it was based because of Deng's, capitalist, releasing the dogs of capitalism. And so I wrote 44 Days Backpacking in China, and I wrote, and it's just, I started seeing things from a different perspective. When we were there in the 1990s, I was an asshole. I mean, I was a typical Western expat asshole. I thought we knew everything. I thought, the West, that smug, Western racism, we are morally superior. We are technologically superior. We are spiritually superior. We are intellectually superior. Even though I had been in Africa for 10 years, traveling and the Middle East, traveling to like 30 countries in Africa and the Middle East, I still had that odious, liberaloid, greater than thou attitude. And I never got out of that, even after 7 years in China. And I even have written about, I know people who have been in China for 30 years, and they have never gotten over that smug Western racism about their vaunted superiority. But having declared bankruptcy, lost everything, seen lots of poverty in the United States, and then, coming back and seeing China just moving at the speed of light, even in the 5 poorest provinces, was an earth-shaking experience for me. And so all the scales on my eyes about our racial or cultural superiority began to fall by the wayside. And it was only then, after all that time, all those experiences, that I really, really, really began to understand the Chinese. So that's basically, and that's what happened.
So, Jeff, um, most of us Westerners, especially Americans, have no experience traveling to other countries around the world, very little. I mean, it's maybe a 2-week cruise or a trip where, oh, it's Friday, it must be Brussels.
Yeah.
Going to China is like, come on, hardly anybody's gone there. I'd like to know for myself what the Chinese people are really like, intellectually, culturally. Uh, I say spiritually, but not in the religious terms, but in terms of Buddhism or whatever it is that is part of their culture. And I want to know how you would judge Chinese research, Chinese high tech, everything, whether it be weapons, whether it be space, whether it be computers. What would you want to tell American people about Chinese people today? We think that they're all working in sweatshops for Apple and Hewlett Packard and Microsoft and everybody else. What are they really like?
Well, the Chinese are very energetic. They're very enterprising. They are willing to make sacrifices to advance themselves. I mean, the classic case of, living above your, in a little room above your store so that your daughter or your son you can make the money for your daughter, your son to go to college. It is not a relaxing place. The problem is there's just a lot. It's not really, even the Chinese say too many people, but there are a lot of people. And in fact, 94% of the Chinese live on something like 56% of the land. They all live on the coastal plains, up the Yangtze River Valley in Sichuan. You go out to the western half of China is absolutely deserted. Xinjiang, Tibet, Qinghai, Inner Mongolia, absolutely deserted. So there are a lot of people. Nothing, you have to accept that. And that bothers a lot of Westerners. Westerners are, very much into their independence and individualism and Marlboro Man. The Chinese are used to being around a lot of other people, and they are very forthcoming in offering you help. This also really bothers a lot of Westerners. I know how to do that. You don't have to tell me. I know how to do that. What they don't realize is that it's very Confucian, it's very Buddhist, and it's very Taoist to relearn the same thing over and over again. So smart people, and I didn't do this in the 1990s. I was a jerk. You can't tell me that. I know that. But I finally realized it's just, repetition, remembering, relearning. That's just the way they do things. They are very family oriented. I've actually written an article where I show the the Western Triangle, Marlboro Man at the top of the triangle, then your family, then your neighborhood, then your community, city, state, region, country, and last comes government. Westerners have a terrible suspicion of they rightfully don't trust their governments because Western governments are for by and large completely corrupt. Whereas in China, you flip that triangle upside down, and the government comes first, then the country, then your region, then your state, then your city, neighborhood, family, and you, my friend, are at the bottom of the dung heap as far as priorities for society. So they are very, very much imbued with the idea of the common good, the commonwealth, cooperation. Individualism is frowned upon in China. They don't like individualism. They don't like Marlboro men. They want team players. For the most part, they're very well educated. I've even written that taxi drivers in China know more about world politics than a lot of people in the United States. It's better in Europe, but especially the United States, your average taxi driver knows more about world politics, current events than most Americans.
Well, is education free for everybody?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Up to well, it's to get into college, you have to pass a big exam called the Gaokao. But if you pass, it's free. My daughter just graduated in last year from Beijing Normal University, and she's a foreigner. She had scholarship. Scholarship. She hardly had to pay anything, and took all of her courses in Chinese. Pretty amazing story.
Wow.
But the other thing is they're well read. They're very plugged into social media. They're very plugged into communication. Everything just moves very, very fast in China. Let's face it, when you've got 1.4 billion people living on 96% of those, so 1.2 billion people living in an area the size of Europe, it's crowded, it's noisy.
Wow.
This really bothers a lot of foreigners. It's just the noise, the activity, the intensity. It's not a place to relax. And that goes for travel too. I mean, if you travel, if you want to be a tourist, unless you go out west, where only 6% of the people live, it's crowded. Everything's crowded. The train stations are crowded. The bus stations are crowded. The airports are crowded. The streets are crowded. It's just, but luckily they've got the world's best infrastructure.
In terms of public transportation, the whole bit.
Oh yeah. When, for example, Beijing has 1,000 bus lines. They've got like 80,000 taxis that are not expensive. 80,000. They have. They've got, superb, interurban transportation. Light rail. Beijing and has one of the largest metros in the world. Ditto Shenzhen, where we lived the last 3 years, which is just north of after 13 total years in China and Beijing, at least officially, because we were traveling around so much. But Shenzhen's also got 1,000 bus lines, 70 or 80,000 taxis that are all electric. The buses in Shenzhen, the 5,000 or whatever number of, I forgot, I even wrote an article about this. New York saying they had the biggest, bus transit system in the world. And I just went and checked, and Shenzhen had like, 2 or 3 times as many buses, and every one of them are electric. So it's until you can get over, and I warn foreigners about this, until you can get over your sense of Western smugness, you will never, ever, ever understand China. And the other thing is they are very, very, very big saving face, saving your face, and saving their face is extremely important. This is very Confucian except in the Communist Party, of course, where it's bare knuckled, self-criticism for continuous improvement. But in general, the Chinese are loath to criticize you to your face, and they are loath to say no. And this is another thing that just drives Westerners absolutely to distraction. Do you want to buy this, or do you want to go here this weekend, or do you want to, whatever the question is? If they don't want to, they're not going to say no. They're just going to never answer. And so you ask again, and then after about the 4th time, there's your no. The answer is no, but they will really, really, really avoid, saying that to your face.
Okay, so Jeff,
sometimes it seems inefficient, especially like in business. You're expecting an email, you're expecting a reply, you don't get one, you ask again, do you want to do this job? You ask again, do you want to do this job? And then finally, that's it, The other thing that is extremely important to understand the Chinese people is Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong really instilled in the Chinese people a tremendous sense of identity, national pride, and as I always say, that maybe half the people, mostly the city people, like Deng Xiaoping's, liberalization policies. Not so much in the rural areas. Deng was not as helpful for the rural people, and caused a lot of pain with all the liberalization. But 95% of the Chinese people absolutely commit to Mao Zedong's worldview on imperialism, colonialism, and global capitalism. Now, they'll never tell you this to your face. I mean, I have to just, you practically have to, after 3 or 4 drinks, they'll finally say something to this effect. But the truth is, people do not realize just how Mao-centric the Chinese people are. And that's why they're so powerful. That's why they're so dynamic. That's why because they reject colonialism. They reject imperialism. They reject global capitalism. And they will, again, they will not tell you that unless you get to know them really, really well, because they don't want to be confrontational. Again, this saving face, they want to, be accepting. So it's an amazing culture. I remember I was in Shenzhen, and even then, at that point, I was like, "Gosh, this weaving in weaving in and out of traffic with my bicycle, and avoiding this and avoiding that. It just seems so chaotic. It just seems completely nuts." But I was swimming at the public pool, and I noticed they didn't have the things, to where people, swam in lanes. It was a big 50-meter by 25-meter pool, wide open. Well, that they saved off the 10 meters of the shallow end for the kiddies. And they are just going everywhere. People are swimming against each other. People are swimming across each other. People are swimming diagonally against each other. People are swimming, in circles around the periphery. Some are swimming horizontally. Some are swimming vertically. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, and I was going, but you know what? I remember I was in New Orleans a couple of years back at this elite men's club that a friend of mine got me a pass into so I could go swimming. And they had 4 lanes. I was in one of those lanes, and this old man, I mean, he must have been in his 80s, was sitting there like a forlorn old dog. He couldn't swim because all the 4 lanes were taken. And so he had to sit there and wait. Whereas if that was in China, they put 2 or 3 people in that lane, and they would work together, and one would wait for the other. What they do, I swam at another pool later where they had lanes. You don't get your own lane. You swim, you work around each other, you help each other. So what all that chaos, all that rush, the bicycles and the cars and everything else, moving in and out and weaving and bobbing and waiting. What it means is that 10 times, 20 times more people can occupy the same space. And it's like a fluid, almost like beautiful symphony of chaos. And it works. It really works. So I'm sitting there, and after that I thought, well, I finally figured that out, and I had to go swimming in a public pool to figure it out. And you bump into someone in China, you don't worry about it. You don't say you're sorry. So, excuse me, you touched me. They don't have time. They're too busy. They're going places. They're doing things. They're hustling. Hustling is a bad word because it connotates illegal activity. But they're working hard. They've got places to go, things to do. So in this sort of just this incredible, it's almost like a Rorschach of just incredible activity, but yet it allows 1.2 billion people to live and work cooperatively and collaboratively together in an area the size of Europe.
All right. So this is a question everybody in the West wants to know. It's a communist totalitarian country. From the way you're describing it, it certainly doesn't sound like that.
Well, that's all part of the even Mao. I was very pleased, at the Alaska thing, that Alaska fiasco, the Alaskan talks. One of the Chinese, I can't remember which Wang it was, Wang Yi or Wang Ji, said, you have your American democracy. We have our Chinese democracy.
Wow.
And so they've had this totalitarian, propaganda. I call it the big lie propaganda machine, the BLPM. That's all it is. I mean, the Chinese, and I mean, the Communist Party. You want to work and be a member of the Chinese Communist Party. You better be prepared to be criticized and offer self-criticism. They're always striving for continuous improvement, better improvement. That's another thing, including the Chinese Communist Party. China, especially since Mao, is one of the most ruthless meritocracies on earth.
Ooh.
And I mean, it's, you have got to really perform and show your stuff if you want to move up. So, I mean, the Chinese, I've written about this in my books. It's brutal. It's brutal. With what Xi Jinping went through, and Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin and Deng Xiaoping. They and millions of other members of lower rank, what they had to go through to get to their level of experience is just, the thought that a brain dead, party hack like Joseph Biden could become president of China, or a reality TV star like Donald Trump could become president of the United States. It's just mind-boggling. They can't even begin to figure figure it out. I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
I'm doing the best I can.
So let me ask you this, because it's been widely talked about, reported in certain places, that China is such a totalitarian government, stranglehold on the people, that they have this facial recognition credit system where they track everything you do. You get good credits for doing good things, and they take away credits when you do bad things, whether it's, jaywalking or buying some cheap food. Is that true? Has that got any truth in reality? Because to anybody from the West, it sounds like, oh my God, technocracy has taken over. Big Brother is running the show. I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, first off, I respond by saying that Big Brother and the West, the National Security Administration, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Administration Agency, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are the greatest technocracy on earth. Everybody knows that since 9/11, that the United States is vacuuming, the Five Eyes, the five Anglo-Saxon countries. The Five Eyes are scooping up every bit of credit cards, expenses, movement, plane tickets, everything on you, me, everywhere. So to sit there, but this is what the West does. The West brilliantly promotes psychological warfare against countries like China to cover up what the West is doing. The West, Xinjiang genocide, which is BS, but it deflects from the West who is committing the worst genocide in the Middle East. And then we can also throw in Israel and Palestine. That's where the real, Africa. That's where the real, this is what they do. And so I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread of your question. What was it, Regis, please?
Well, that a lot of us have been reading.
The facial recognition.
Yeah, social credit system, all of that.
Well, I have written about the social credit system, and I've used the social credit system in China. As everybody who knows anything about it, and when almost no Westerners do, again, they want you to forget about Google and NSA and CIA and DIA and all these others, Facebook, and everybody just vacuuming everything that you do into massive, computers out in Utah. The social credit system in China is designed to allow people to make complaints about unethical behavior. It's a two-way street. If you're a crank and you're complaining about this and complaining about that, and after 2 or 3 times they realize that you're full of BS, well, then you're going to get called on for not respecting the social credit system. I use the social credit system. My company that we still have officially in China, has a social credit score number. If my company does something bad, like pollute a river or rip off a customer or provide crappy service or crappy products, Chinese can complain, and I have to answer for that. So if I'm abusing my employees or, ripping people off, this is a platform for the victims to state their case. It is as well. The company is contacted and they have an opportunity to rebuttal. If it's true about what happened, then they have to fix it. And if they don't fix it, that's where you'll hear about, tax dodgers and, people doing criminal activity, white collar crime, that kind of stuff, who have been caught red-handed, and they lose their privileges of, flying, using the airports and first class on high-speed trains and that kind of stuff. For a while, it's not forever. So the social credit score is wonderful because it is based on trust. And this is another thing that Westerners have the hardest time understanding, is that Chinese governance and Chinese society is based on mutual trust. The government has faith in their people, and the people trust their government until they screw up. And then if they, thousands of times over Chinese history, when the government screws up, they grab spears and knives and they, overrun the palace or the government office locally or whatever, and demand a change in the heavenly mandate, to demand a change in governance. Mao had tremendous faith in his people. And that's why he was able to do so much and set them on the road to the success that they have today. So the social credit, now facial recognition concerns the Chinese. They are, and here's another thing. If Westerners don't have democracy, we have Potemkin Potemkin democracy. We have, a simulacrum of democracy. If, states in the United States tried to pass laws that GMO had to be put on food packaging. I mean, this just goes, there's thousands of examples. Well, the big, multi-billion-dollar corporations come in, they bribe the legislatures, the governors, et cetera, and they stop it. When there was everything in China, even back in the time of Mao, is published for the people to comment on, critique, et cetera. Back then they didn't have internet. They had signboards where they would, in neighborhoods, they would, put up new laws and new regulations proposed to give the people a bottom-up opportunity to comment on this pending legislation. So facial recognition started to really concern the Chinese. And I've written about this. They were getting a little bit spooked about it. And this is one of the reasons that I call China's governance leaders Baba Beijing. One of the reasons that they really came down hard on Baidu and Alibaba, Tencent, WeChat, and these behemoth Chinese technology companies. Baba Beijing's coming down on their megatech companies, but the megatech companies in the West are censoring presidents and whoever they darn well please. So facial recognition, there was a lot of concern, a lot of blowback, and so they proposed a bunch of laws, and they are definitely controlling it. They're especially controlling the control that the big Chinese tech companies have over that data. Facial recognition. But, it's a two-way street. If you trust your government, like the Chinese do, they are assumed to be competent, experienced people who live by the golden rule. Do not do unto others what you do not want done to you. I mean, that's all Chinese governance is all based on ethics. It's not based on morals like in the West. So they trust their government, but they complained. And so now they've really kind of reined in the facial recognition. But it's wonderful because now China has caught tens of thousands of fugitives that were, cases from the 80s and 90s, who had gotten away with murder, really, in some cases murder. Facial recognition caught them. Facial recognition is also finding many, many, many lost children, lost family members. So you just can't sit there, and the Chinese support that. So that's basically what I say about facial recognition. They're working on it, they're controlling it. It has huge benefits for society. And it didn't bother me when we were there.
Okay, so here's another topic, shifting gears a little bit. United States is always accusing China of stealing intellectual property. Now, I have read that the Chinese right now are far more advanced than the United States in research and developing high technology. Can you confirm or deny that?
Well, China tech is so exciting and so mind-blowing that I actually started a side project to China Rising Radio Sinoland called China Tech News Flash. And I have done about 100 short videos. It has its own website, chinatechnewsflash.com. It is absolutely mind-boggling what the Chinese are doing with high tech. And what's so wonderful about it is that it is for the idea is that this is to help the people. This is to improve the lives of the people. The Chinese do not fear robots because in communism, if you can get a robot to do the job that you used to have, and you tax the surplus value, the what that robot does, and then use that tax money to do something else for you or find you something else to do, why not? So Americans and Europeans especially, have this horrible fear of robots, but in communism, it doesn't. It's actually welcomed because it will liberate your time to do more enjoyable things. The difference is that in the West, all the productivity that those robots make will go to the 1%. It will go to the gigantic global, transnational corporations. They're going to pocket all that money. And they will buy off every legislature in Europe and every legislature in the United States and Canada and everywhere else to make sure that they're not taxed. They're not going to allow those robots to be taxed. Whereas in China, they will tax robots' productivity, which will be plowed back into helping the people. Medical care. China now has universal health care. China now has Social Security. They have health care for 1.4 billion people. America, look at the cesspool that the American health system is. It's just a bunch of robber barons. So they were ahead of the United States for the moon, Mars, aerospace, avionics. They're now building airplanes to compete against Boeing and Airbus, cooperating with the Russians. And they a death blow to Nassau is that Russia and China just agreed to cooperate together to build a manned station on the moon. Mm-hmm. So if you want to really appreciate, I can't keep up. There is so much going on with China high tech. It is withering. And I could make that a full-time job, but it's just absolutely, you're just gobsmacked at what they're doing.
Let's put this in concrete terms. They are then not stealing American intellectual property rights. They are far more advanced, probably in years, than the United States, from what you're saying.
Well, that's personally, I think so. At least, when I go back to the United States and I see the infrastructure there, it's pathetic. And I don't see in the newspapers and stuff all this sexy stuff that China's doing. They just came out with the fabrics that you can change the lights on. The West has been trying to do it for years, to actually sort of make your fabric in your shirt, where you can change the colors by changing the electric wires, and they're just all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's not just that, but they're doing basic research. They're building their tokamak, sun, the sun, solar energy by fusion, which actually got its start in Russia back in the 1940s. And they, it's just go to www.chinatechnewsflash.com, and I've got 100 videos. None of them are more than 10 minutes long. Most of them are 3 to 5 minutes long. I put in the necessary analysis and what it means and the geopolitics. And if China is not already further ahead, then the US and Europe are doing a piss poor job of promoting their native tech. And it's just incredible. So I've got pages of hyperlinks that I don't have time to report on.
Well, but I hope you send me some of them, and I'll put them in the description. In terms of military capability in relationship to the United States, are they ahead or are they behind? Big question.
Yeah, well, in terms of China has never, going back 5,000 years, has never been an expansionist imperialist country. They don't have that DNA in their geopolitics like the West does. And so their military has always been about defending their borders. This was especially true with Mao Zedong. He did send Chinese into Korea. He helped Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam with the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But China has never had that, takeover, exploitation type mentality like the West has. So
well,
they don't have to attack America. They only have to defend their borders. And in that case, let me just finish. In that case, they're way ahead of the United States, because if the United States tried to attack China without resorting to nuclear arms, they'd get their asses kicked. China would kick their butts. But in terms of, this imperial outreach, America is stronger. But in terms of national border defense, China is stronger. And the Chinese are very happy with that.
And, I have to say, it's the same feeling here in Russia. I've interviewed many people, some specialists, some journalists, who have said the exact same thing. Russia has not focused on imperial advancement, but has focused on defense of the motherland.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
Here's something that I'm hearing from Russians in the street and Russians in journalism. Yes, Russians in the former military, retired. They are afraid that China, they don't trust China. Many people, they think that China is going to do the same thing that America is doing. It's going to try to take over and trick Russia and dominate the planet.
Well, show me the evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
For 5,000 years, China was technologically, militarily, and economically the most advanced country in the world. when they went to Malaysia and India and the Middle East and Africa back in the 1400s, even before Columbus, their boats, they had 300 boats in their flotilla, not three little, potato peelers like the Santa Maria, of Columbus. 300 boats, big ones, 10 times, 15 times the size of Western boats at the time. Their first flotilla had 35,000 people. This is before Columbus even got out of the port in Portugal. So they had arms, they had chemical weapons, they had mines, they had grenades, grenade launchers, they had cannons, they had guns, they had guns. I mean, you just can't, they were so far ahead of everybody that they came in contact with. If they had the same DNA that Westerners have, which is expansion, invasion, occupation, exploitation, extraction, etc., then they could have easily taken over the world. They could have easily, landed, in Saudi Arabia and just, moved up into Europe. They were so advanced, but that's not their DNA. Instead, they took princes and scientists and poets and artists and people from those countries and took them back to China for a few years, plied them with concubines, and so that they could exchange information. China went to those places all across the Indian Ocean and gave them 200-volume books sets of everything that the Chinese wanted to share. Let's learn from each other. Let's help each other. So they even brought back animals and plants and dignitaries back to China, stay for a year or two, and then they brought them back. So yeah, they are simply foisting onto China this Western concept of expansionism, invasion, exploitation, etc. The Chinese they've never done it, and they could have taken a wish. We would be speaking Chinese if they were like us. So you can tell all your, they're just, Russians are Europeans too. They can't get this idea out of their head that everybody's trying to, take over the world, because that's what the West does. It's what we do.
Okay,
so it's not, the Chinese don't do that.
Okay, so Jeff, I want to end on this note. Current affairs. This embarrassing situation in Alaska last week. Basically Russia and President Putin said, we're done with America. They called back their ambassador, said it's no use talking to them. You can't work with them. There's no diplomatic relations whatsoever right now. China gets embarrassed, grossly embarrassed. And what is their response? And what is the state of U.S.-China relations now?
Well, China, yeah, it's awful. But I found a quote by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, the Egyptian, and he survived and didn't get assassinated like Dag Hammarskjöld did by the CIA. But after he retired as Secretary General, the top guy at the United Nations, in his personal papers, he talked about how he really worked, he went to school and diplomatic school and, political science, and learned all about the art of diplomacy. But he said, after I started working, I'd noticed that the United States doesn't care. They don't do diplomacy. All they are imperial powers. Imperial powers don't do diplomacy. And he said the Romans didn't do diplomacy. It was just roll over you and crush you if you do not do what we demand. And he said the American empire is no different. The American empire looks upon diplomacy as a sign of weakness. And what's interesting to think about is that, Blinken and Sullivan and Alaska, they never talk about the United Nations, even though the United States controls it. Unfortunately, like a tired old hen, but they never talk about the United Nations. They talk about rules-based order.
Yeah.
Putin, Xi, the leaders of what I call the communist, socialist, anti-imperialist countries like Iran and Cuba and Venezuela, Russia, of course, DPRK, they're always talking about the United Nations as the defining benchmark for international cooperation. But the United States, your Anglo land, the United States, EU, Five Eyes, and Israel, they shit on the United Nations. It's just, the United Nations is for everybody else. The West doesn't do the United Nations. They're rules-based order. When Blinken kept talking about rules-based order, that simply means the rule is that you do what we tell you to do. You're either a vassal, a geopolitical or resource whore, or you're an enemy. There's nothing in between. It's black and white. So that's why, with Russia, but the Chinese and the Russians are just so freaking patient, with their diplomacy. And so for the first time since Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong was one of the great, rhetorical, firebrands of the 20th century. He scared the pea wadding out of the West. But for the first time at this Alaska meeting, the two Chinese representatives finally kind of spoke up. Saying we have Chinese democracy, we have the United Nations. Your rules-based order is not everybody's. It's yours. Ours is the United Nations. So I don't think it's, as far as the current state of affairs, China is unstoppable. It is a well-run, well-managed, well-governed, visionary country. The people are unified. There's a tremendous sense of national unity among the people. No Marlboro men in China. And the United States and its lackey vassals are going to continue to flounder, and this is all they can do. I just read an article in Foreign Affairs magazine where they even said the only way the United States can win is if we destroy the Chinese regime. It's just unbelievable. They even admit they can't compete with China. All we can do is to try to destroy them. It'll never happen. It's just not going to happen. China's going to get stronger. The United States and the rest of Urangland are going to continue to flounder, and the disparity and the discrepancies between the two, and Russia too. I don't know if you noticed, if you heard, but it's before the Alaska fiasco, when the Americans and the Chinese met, Wang Yi already had invited Lavrov to Beijing for consultations.
Yeah, I know.
So I think, people put up with the Western bully, Western colonialism for 500 years. The West has had a fabulously lucrative and profitable run of exploitation, rape, pillage, genocide, have gotten very, very rich, basically, plundering the rest of the world. And now they don't have Russia, they don't have China, they don't have DPRK, they don't have Iran, they don't have Venezuela. Those 5 countries represent a huge amount of resources that global capitalism cannot touch anymore. Now look at Iran. I mean, if anybody tries to attack Iran, Iran's going to kill them. I mean, they're so technologically advanced, and they've got socialist unity, socialist vision like China. They can't kill Venezuela. They're solidified, they're unified, solidarity. So it's just going to continue being the same charade, the 24-hour propaganda cycle. And I don't see it getting any better. I mean, I think the U.S. is going to continue to make a fool of itself. But I think we're going to start hopefully seeing Russia and China, and Iran's been pretty outspoken, and the DPRK. But I think we're just going to see the same ridiculous dog and pony show, the same tired, masturbatory sanctions and embargoes, and the West has nothing else in their toolkit except sanctions and embargoes. That's all they've got. And blackmail, bribery, and extortion. That's all they've got. So I don't think it's going to, other than the fact that we can maybe enjoy Moscow and Beijing being a little bit more assertive. I sure hope they quit working with the United States, and especially the United States, but even Europe is a tired vassal of American empire.